Rehashing established business models is no longer enough. Innovation is one of the most important sources to achieve competitive advantage, and creativity has become a crucial essence of any innovative business. Successful entrepreneurship, therefore, requires a focus on creativity, the integration of innovation, and strategic business practices. Let's hear some first-hand experiences of how creative minds can boost your business and turn times of uncertainty into opportunities.
What a perfect way to start this next block. It's block number 3, and it's about innovation and creative organization. We've got some amazing talks coming up. We've even got a marvelous panel coming up. And to find out who our next speaker is, we've only got one more thing to do, and that's roll the video. And here he is. Without execution, it ain't innovation. That's a smart way of putting it. Here he is from Accenture. Shobha Ali, how are you?
I am well. How are you?
I am good. I'm buzzing, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Stage is yours. Looking forward to talking to you later on. Enjoy.
All right. Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on what time zone you're in, if you're live or watching this online. Thank you for the time. So my talk today is actually focused on a topic that I particularly is very close to my heart. I spent a lot of time talking about this with clients. I actually recently, just to update my CV, I recently left Accenture about 3 weeks ago, and I've joined Elastic, a software company that's distributed around the globe, as their global managing director of a new program we're building called Elevate. But enough about that. I'm here to talk to you about orthodoxies. So what are orthodoxies? Well, I think right now, having lived through over a year's worth of the pandemic, obviously we think the world is very different than the world we knew before last March. This quote really struck me. It's from a book I read recently, which I will come back to later. But there are times when tomorrow no longer resembles today, that the compass is cracked by which we navigate existence. And we are lost at sea. And that's really important because a lot of big companies find themselves in this space all the time. And a lot of disruptive startups think they're going to be the ones who are cracking the compass and changing things. And that's what orthodoxy is all about. So I want to start with a company that's actually over 100 years old and just went bankrupt a couple of years ago, Sears. Sears was actually the original Amazon 1.0. Excuse me, in that you used to be able to order anything from the Sears catalog and it would come by mail. And then of course they grew to department stores and the rest, and eventually went bankrupt. But their bankruptcy didn't happen overnight. It actually took about 7 decades. And there was a great article in Fortune magazine that documented the 7-decade slide of Sears. And why that stuck with me is a quote from Ernest Hemingway from a book that he'd written many years ago called The Sun Also Rises, where one character asked another, how did you go bankrupt? And his response was so classic because it fits what happens to so many companies: gradually and then suddenly, right? Disruption does not happen overnight, but they like to think it does. And they always say, well, we couldn't have done anything. We couldn't have changed. You know, we want to change this new creature, or we want to grow wings if we're a horse. But the problem is that when they argue that I couldn't do this or we couldn't enter that market, they're right. They can't. There's a fantastic book, Illusions by Richard Bach, where he says that, argue for your limitations. And sure enough, they're your limitations because you just put them on yourselves. So this gets to what the question is of what is an orthodoxy? It is just a fancy consulting word for that's the way we do things here. So when you think about that's the way we do things here, and you start to look around you, you see them everywhere, right? The first time I came across orthodoxies was actually about 15 years ago when I was working at a client in the financial services industry. This is before the big global meltdown. And I walked down their hallway, which looked a lot like this, except they had 2 name tags at every door. One was the name of the executive. This is their C-suite. And the second name tag was how long they'd been there, which was like 25 years in service, 18 years in service, et cetera. What I saw was, in addition to being proud of the fact they'd been at the company a long time, is that they'd never seen any other way of doing things. And when I posed the question to them of what would you do if Google just walked into your industry with $10 billion and hired the best people out of your company and the next company and the next company and created a new one from scratch, would they really do things the way you do them today? And that's when the light bulb went off. They realized that they were bound by the ways they had done things for decades in their old business processes, and they had to change. The problem is it's very hard for companies to change. It's easy for them to say, we want to change. They can create a little innovation department. They can do some corporate venturing, which we'll talk about later today. But for the most part, it's very hard for them to change because it's not in their DNA. And unfortunately, there is no CRISPR for companies. You can't just inject new DNA in and change the culture and change the behaviors, because it all starts with leadership and from the top. So I'm going to start with a client of mine. I started my career in aerospace and defense, which you might be able to guess from all of the paraphernalia behind me on my shelf, is that I have a big love of the space industry. And one of my early clients was actually in the rocket industry. And they, for decades, built rockets like this, which would go up, they'd deploy a satellite, and then of course the rocket would burn up on the reentry, and the satellite would go and do what it does. Then along comes Elon Musk. And Elon Musk, you recognize this photo, it's the first landing of 2 boosters from the Falcon 9 Heavy. The third one landed on a drone barge, landing 2 boosters simultaneously. What he did was fundamentally disrupt the industry, because rockets up until that point were not reusable. You blew them up. And by making them reusable, he changed the economics of the industry, which allows him to launch things much more cheaply than anybody else. Now, he does that because he wants to do this, which is he wants to go to Mars. And to do that, he has to create reusable rockets. They crashed quite a few of them before they finally got it right. Now they're doing the same thing with Starship, and they just got that right. But what allows him to do something that the dinosaurs could have done, the Boeings and Lockheeds and Arianespace and the rest could have done this, the Russians, the Chinese could have done this, they didn't, right? Because they didn't even think, let me build a reusable rocket. But what it also allows him to do is this, which is to build Starlink, which is going to become the largest telco satellite cluster on the planet. It already is. I think he has more satellites than anybody else combined at this point. But it's also going to allow him to compete with every single telco on the planet simultaneously to provide broadband services to people wherever you are. And that, I believe, will make him the first trillionaire on the planet if Starlink ever goes public or SpaceX ever goes public. But going back to dinosaurs, some of you may recognize this picture. This is actually the crater in the Yucatan where believe the asteroid impact that happened about 65 million years ago that wiped out the dinosaurs. Except there is now a different theory in the geological industry which says that this triggered it. What it actually also triggered was this, a place in India called the Deccan Traps, where lava flows then continued to go on for millions of years, releasing poisonous gases, which actually drove many of the species to extinction. It didn't all happen in 3 days. It happened over the course of millions of years, which actually matches the geological record. So we like to talk about big disruptions, new technologies coming in. Consulting firms are fantastic at this. You have to get cloud, you have to get quantum, you have to get AI, blah, blah, blah. The reality is it's not about the technologies or the asteroids. It's about what you do with them. Right? The disruptions happen when somebody takes the technology and applies it in a way that unlocks innovation because it's unlocking value, which gets to the question of, well, what does that mean? Well, when Steve Jobs came on the stage back in 2007, which seems like a lifetime ago now, and he showed this picture, and then he turned around and said, I don't understand why we have all these keyboards when you can use your fingers, and he introduced the iPhone. It was dismissed at the time. Of course, we all know what it actually did to the industry, because while that was the asteroid, what it actually did was open up a whole range of other industries for disruption, like taxis, Uber obviously being an example most of us know. But what it also did was cascade really far down the value chain. This is actually a picture of a homeless man in China who gets money from other people, not in cash, but using QR codes for WePay and Alipay, right? Because that's how they use money in that town. And so for him to get money, he just has QR codes and people just give him money from their phones, right? Which goes to a comment Bill Gates made many, many years ago, which was, and this is a great example of an orthodoxy. Banking is necessary, but banks are not. So think about the disruption that's happening now in the financial services sector. We're going to come back to that in a moment. So orthodoxies are a great way to uncover opportunities for innovation, but you have to first be able to uncover them. Amazon with Alexa, which is just a voice interface to the world, was a way of innovating because it took a bunch of technologies, brought them together in a new way that unlocked value. I can do so many things with my device, which I won't name again because it's on my desk here, and I think it thought I was talking to it. But that raises, of course, the next question: what is valuable? And a big part of innovation is just to keep asking why, what, until you eventually get to the root thing that needs to be solved. So when Henry Ford famously said, if I asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. That's actually the wrong question, because his customers only know horses. So of course, they're going to think in the context of the box they know. What he should have been asking is, what are you trying to do? And when he got to the answer of I have to move these things or I have to get from New York to DC in 5 hours, then he knows the answer cannot possibly be a horse, which then leads to what else can I make, right? Another way of putting it is a business school professor, Oren Harari, said, you don't get to a light bulb by continuously improving candles. Sounds obvious when you say it out loud, but that's what most corporations tend to do, which actually gets to the heart of how do you figure this out? There's a fantastic quote that says, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes defining the problem and 5 minutes solving it. But most people, most organizations, even many startups, spend 10 minutes going, okay, this is a problem I want to go solve. And then they just keep iterating and iterating on their solution, hoping to get to product market fit because they don't spend enough time understanding what the right problem is that needs to be solved. A guy who does understand how to do that is actually Jeff Bezos, right? There was a great interview from him in 2009. I came across it in an old Time magazine where he said most companies, big corporations, their way of looking at innovation is we look at what we can do and then we see what other customers we can serve with those capabilities. He flips it on its head and says, I look at what customers' problems are, and then I say, can we solve that? And if not, let's go either build, buy, acquire, whatever the things we need to do to solve that problem because it's a meaningful problem. Fundamentally different way of looking at it, but it allows him to do something nobody else seems to be able to do, which is to enter any industry he wants and go compete in it. So if you look at this chart, it's a fantastic one from FinShots, is look at all the different industries Amazon has entered into and is just beating people like a drum when it comes to that. So the problem in the orthodoxies in part is that, again, it's a bit like the air around us, which is a fluid, but we don't recognize it because we exist in it. And fish doesn't really see the water it's in. It's hard to find them. But when you do identify orthodoxies, you realize they exist not just in things that face customers, but actually inside your organization as well. You can find orthodoxies in how you do your supply chain or your logistics or your procurement or even your legal department or finance or talent. It doesn't matter. Everywhere there are orthodoxies about how we do things. And when you break those, you create new opportunities for innovation. So I will pause for a moment because this is where the classic corporates come in and say, well, startups just want to break everything. And they have a point. Because there's a great quote from a writer from the 1920s, said the gate did not grow there. And what he meant by that was there's a reason why it was there in the first place. So you have to sometimes look at orthodoxies and say, why do they exist before I blow them apart? Then you may blow them apart, but you have to understand why they were put there in the first place. So when I did some work with a large bank years ago, we actually uncovered that they had two sets of orthodoxies, which they called were kind of red and blue. The red ones were actually a regulation that they could point at and say, if we break that, we're going to jail. The blue ones were just something that at some point in the past, they said, we're not going to do that. And then it got stuck. And then they kept saying, we can't do that. But nobody actually knew why they couldn't do it. And it turns out there was no reason anymore, which gave them new opportunities to innovate again. So now I'm going to take you through a bunch of examples of how companies have actually done this in different industries, in different segments. And all of this is really meant to just give you ideas for thinking, well, if I'm doing a startup, what else might I look at as a way to disrupt something or to break an orthodoxy? And if I'm a corporation, you should be thinking about all of these as saying, which of these could we do, right? It applies on both sides of the fence. So obviously, pre-pandemic, this was kind of what it was like to stand in line at a Starbucks or a coffee shop. And Starbucks said, well, you know what? Why don't we create a mobile app? Some of you may have it. I certainly have it on my phone here. Haven't used it in a long time. But one of the things about this, in addition to making your ordering a lot easier, not having to wait in line, is that people would regularly put $10, $20, $30 on their card and leave it there for convenience. So when they wanted to order, they didn't have to pull out a credit card. It was already on their thing. What that actually did was allow Starbucks to become one of the largest banks by deposit without paying any interest. Because all that money that was being put on their card, they didn't pay you for it, but they got to use it. It was a float for them. So they got an unintended benefit because we were getting value. And so it's really important to understand that when you're giving somebody value, they will give you something in return, but it's important to understand value so that you can do that. Another example being, of course, in the old days of waiting in line at a supermarket, which of course now they're more distant, but Amazon, of course, cracked that code with the Go store. There are no cash registers. There are no people working cash registers. There's just a store. You walk in, you take whatever you want, put it in your basket, and walk out, right? Fantastic, because what they realized was the business case closes when you actually don't have the registers and the people and all that working. Even if on rare occasion you lose something from people who are your customers, you know who they are because they have Prime accounts, it's still cheaper than paying for all that other infrastructure. But from a convenience point of view, from a customer point of view, this is a fantastic place to walk in, get what you need, to walk out, right? You can unlock the value of underutilized assets. Well, we already talked about Uber, right, which is a platform that does nothing more than connect people who need a ride with people who have a car and free time. That's an underutilized asset, or two underutilized assets. Airbnb does the same thing with an underutilized space. Some of you may have stayed in Airbnb recently. Another one in TaskRabbit, another underutilized asset is your time, which is in fact the most valuable thing any of us has, is our time. So taking somebody who has free time and monetizing that, well, that's what that platform does. Another example of your time is, and this is what Tesco did in South Korea back in the early part of the last decade, was people who were waiting to go home from work. They're South Koreans are the busiest people on the planet, and they hate shopping. So what they did was they said, what if we put the store in the subway And they actually set it up to look just like a store. You could walk up, scan QR codes, and then head home. And by the time you got home, your order was already been packaged and would show up at your house 2 hours later, right? This was before modern delivery of rest, again, almost 10 years ago. But this idea of saying, how do I take something unutilized and use it? Understanding how your customers actually use your products, right? Simple example is lettuce. And this example has no technology in it whatsoever. Simple example is lettuce, right? People would buy lettuce. If you were like me, you'd buy it, you'd stick it in the fridge. 2 weeks later, you'd throw it out because it had spoiled. You'd wipe out the spot in the fridge that got a little slimy, and you'd buy another one because it was cheap. And I bought it because I wanted to eat more healthily, not because I actually like salad that much. The problem was making a salad is actually a pain, which is why I didn't do it, right? You have to chop it, you have to wash it, you have to do all this stuff, which just sounds like a lot of work. So a company comes along called Fresh Express and says, you know what? People will pay more for a commodity if you give them the value. And the value here is their time. So what they did was they just chopped and washed your lettuce for it, stuck it in a bag, and sold it to you for 7 to 10 times the price of the commodity. And in the process, created a $7 billion industry that does nothing more than chop and wash your lettuce for you, right? Nest took something that had already existed for years, a smart thermostat, and just took one extra step out of it, said, don't program me. Because programming it is actually the thing that drove people nuts. And so no one would do it, which is why smart thermostats weren't actually being smart. So they just said, well, just turn the dial till you find what you like, and we'll learn over time from what you're doing. Fantastic startup that ultimately, of course, was acquired by Google. Traditional pharmaceutical pill bottles look like this. Hard to follow, hard to know what you're supposed to do, too many instructions. So a company comes along called PillPack and creates a very simple one, and they mail it to you. It doesn't cost you anything. It's just covered as part of your prescription. Amazon, again, looked at that and said, that's a really good idea, and bought them. And it's been scaling it like crazy, because what it does is it tells you exactly what you need when you need to take it, which is really good for the market of people who tend to take prescription drugs, which many of whom are seniors. Take something like this, the classic airline ticket. Tons of information on there. None of it makes sense really to a traveler, right? But it was on there because the gate agent needed it, except by the 90s, they all had computers. They didn't need all this information anymore, but it was still put on there because that's just the way they did things. Until finally somebody said, you know what, we should just make the boarding passes a lot simpler because everything's in the computer. And now the impact, of course, is it makes it easier for people to make their flights, board it, et cetera. You could take it a step further and really change the design of it, but it's about simplifying that and taking the friction out of it. You can change your industry business model completely, right? So of course, in the old days, you would buy software on a CD for some of us who are old enough to remember, and you get it like this, and you'd have to upgrade it, right? Salesforce, my previous employer, said, well, why have software at all? Why don't you subscribe to it, right? And they took a long time for them to convince, for Mark to convince people to go to the cloud. But then you look at Salesforce, of course, now they're a juggernaut, right? They've done tremendous things. But you can change a different business model. You can be like Syngenta that says, I'm going to give discounted or free farm equipment to farmers, which is really expensive stuff. But I'm going to have the exclusive right for the data that's coming off of it because I put instruments all over it. I'm going to take that data, I'm going to sell it to the people who work at the Chicago Board of Commodities Exchange, and I'm going to have this commodities information before anybody else does, which is worth a lot of money, which is worth more than it costs me to give these people this equipment. And they're going to be a platform in the middle between getting source information and selling it to the financial traders. Excuse me. You could also be a movie theater, and you know, it looks like movie theaters are finally starting to come back, which is great. Going from selling tickets to actually selling subscriptions, where you can see a certain number of movies a month for a flat fee. Why? Because they realize that they're actually in the business. They've always been in the business of selling popcorn and soda, not selling movie tickets. And as movie tickets, as movie windows have gotten shorter for how long they're actually in the theater, they have to make even more from the concessions. But so going to a subscription model gets people in more often, allows them to fill those seats, which is how they actually make money. You can challenge what is valuable. And this is really important because what do people value? Well, speaking of movies, most of you hopefully recognize Nick Fury from the Avengers arc. Avengers actually ultimately made over $20 billion, but it started with those first two movies, Iron Man and the Incredible Hulk. And they did something that challenged what people considered valuable. Up until that point, people didn't sit around normally, unless you were a movie buff, you didn't sit around in the credits. As soon as the credits roll, people get up and they leave the theater. And what they did was they changed all of that because they put a little teaser in the trailer, and that teaser got people to stay in their seats. And then it started a buzz, and people would post on social media, did you see the trailer? And like, do you see the thing for the next movie coming out? And each one of them telegraphed what the next movie was going to be and a little tiny teaser of it, which actually created buzz for the movie, which actually helped them with their building demand for it, which of course got them bigger ticket sales, but it also let them know what people were talking about. And it created and motivated the fan base in between the movies that eventually led to, of course, the empire that Marvel became. Another thing you can challenge that's valuable, this is actually a billionaire from Brazil who about 7 years ago went on social media and said, I am going to bury my Bentley so that I can take it with me when I go to the afterlife, which of course, as you can imagine, caused a huge scandal on social media, and people thought he was crazy and the epitome of narcissistic and the rest. And then he came back on and said, thank you for making my point. Because he was actually trying to kick off, and as part of an ad campaign, he was kicking off Organ Donor Week. Because what he's saying is, why are you burying valuable things that could be valuable to somebody else that you're not going to use anymore? But by doing that, he flipped the script and got people to go, oh my God, he's right. And it totally changed the conversation. But he did something like this that really challenged people's definition of what is valuable, to make them realize they had something valuable in their own bodies. Challenge product design. So here's an example of something that we're probably all familiar with, the notorious six-pack ring that goes with canned drinks. The problem with these, of course, as many of you know, is that it's an environmental nightmare for things like turtles and birds and all kinds of things in wildlife when it gets out there because people throw their litter around. Well, you can try to solve the problem by doing things like this. There's a brewery in California that actually makes edible six-pack rings so that if it does get thrown away, the turtle can eat it, I suppose. But you can challenge the orthodoxy by stepping even further back and saying, why do I need a six-pack ring? And the answer is, well, duh, Shupper, because you want to hold the cans together. Unless you're Corona. And Corona says, well, you're right, I want to hold them together, but why do I hold them together like this? What if I could screw them together like this? And then I can break the definition of a six-pack. Maybe it's a four-pack, maybe it's an eight-pack. Maybe you can now put different brands together in the same thing. You can carry it in one hand as you walk along. You can do anything you want once you rethink the product itself and say, what problem am I really solving? Speaking of canned drinks, in the old days, this is a classic Coca-Cola vending machine that got a huge upgrade to this. It took dollar bills for a long time in the US. But then somebody said, well, you know what? Vending machines are good for more than drinks and chips. What if we could use it to vend product? And these became the most profitable retail establishments in airports by square footage, period. Because you don't have any staff, you only have the high turning items, blah, 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 and away you go. Well, when I was at Salesforce, we actually took that a step further and said, well, what other problems could you solve with a vending machine? Well, it turns out you could solve the IT help desk, because a lot of what was going on at our IT help desk, where we had these very high paid people who did IT support, they were actually just fulfilling requests for, I need a new power adapter, I need a new charger for my phone, I need a new headset because mine broke, I need a new keyboard, right? So they said, well, why don't we just put vending machines throughout the building that have these devices in them, scan your badge, we code it so that you can only get a certain number of these things per certain time period. So one power supply every 3 months, one headset every 6 months, whatever, and free up our people to actually do value-added work. It was a huge hit. You can redefine a process. So this is actually one of my favorite examples, comes from a book called The Box, which is giving away the ending a bit. But in the shipping industry, much like movie theaters make money selling popcorn and soda, ships actually only make money when they're at sea, moving between ports. When they're in port, they're just sitting there. And the problem was, in the old days, when the shipping routes looked like this back in the 30s and 40s, this is how ships were unloaded, right? You'd have people come up, they put all the stuff on these pallets or on these nets, they'd lower them off. It would take weeks to load and unload a ship. And therefore, it cost about $5.83 a ton to unload a ship. Well, the problem with the industry was that as World War II was coming to an end, the airplanes that were rolling off the factory lines were now being repurposed to commercial uses, right? The DC-3s, et cetera, that were being made. And air cargo was blowing ship cargo out of the water, no pun intended, because it's just a hell of a lot faster. And the shippers were all like, well, how do we make our ships go faster? Which is illogical when you just say it out loud, because you'll never make a ship go as fast as an airplane, not with these kinds of ships. But a person came along who was from outside the industry. He was actually a trucking person. And he said, well, you're thinking about this all the wrong way. It's not about how fast you get across the sea. It's how fast you load and unload your ship. And nobody believed him, of course. So he had to go out and buy his own ship. This is the ship, the Ideal X. He bought it. He had to go and get special cranes made in 2 ports, one in New Jersey, I believe, and one in Texas. And he ran cargo from one to the other. Oh, he set up a company, by the way, some of you may have heard of it, called Sealand. And he did that to move cargo from point A to point B. And he used these cargo containers that were very like the ones that he used on the trucks. He's made the deck special so that you can actually put containers on it because they weren't designed that way before. So he spent a lot of money to prove a point. And the point he proved was you could actually do it because the cost to ship a ton had moved from, excuse me, $5.83 a ton to 16 cents a ton. The net result being 95% of the world's cargo now goes this way because this one person had a vision and said, well, we're doing it wrong. So I want to come back to changing the rules, and I want to leave on this point because A lot has happened recently, a lot of things going on in the world. And an interesting one is that quote from Martin Gurry, the person I mentioned at the beginning. There was about 12 years ago, there was a financial market meltdown. And if any of you have seen the movie The Big Short, if you haven't, I highly recommend you see it. If you have seen it, you'll know what I'm talking about, who this character is. But basically, the view was at the end of the day, the average people are going to be the ones that are going to have to pay for everything, because we always do. We always do. We are the ones who get screwed. What's interesting is Mr. Gurry wrote a book a few years ago called The Revolt of the Public. And what he talked about was that with this fifth wave of information, this sphere where now everybody's connected all the time across multiple channels, you get things that are not predictable by the status quo, that the authority, whether it's political, it's business, you name it, is not set up, academics, whatever, they're not set up to respond to a mass that moves much faster than they can understand in a way they don't understand. And this is what he calls the revolt of the public. You can talk about whether it was the Arab Spring, the elections in Spain or Italy during the early part of last decade, the election of, our presidential election here, Brexit. There are lots of examples of where people aren't behaving the way that the authority expected them to behave. And what that also means in the business world is everything is up for disruption. A really interesting example of this happened just in the last 4 months, and many of you probably saw it, and some of you may have even participated in. And what, of course, I'm talking about is Reddit and Wall Street Bets, because Wall Street Bets came along and took on the hedge funds and said, they are shorting a stock that we really believe in, so we are going to rally and take them on. And what they did was they cost Melvin Capital billions of dollars and their investors billions of dollars through a bunch of retail investors, just everyday people on the street. Now, this is a classic example of what he's talking about, this disruption, this ability to harness the masses, do these things to break the orthodoxy of, well, Wall Street operates a certain way, and hedge funds and only big players know how to play these games. Even the stuff in The Big Short was done by big banks making profits off of other big banks and hedge funds making profits off of other big banks. What this is doing now is changing the game in a whole new way. And that once that box is open, it's not closing again. So I expect a lot more of this, whether it's this, we can go into conversations about all kinds of things, cryptocurrencies, everything else. A lot is changing. So I want to leave with a quote from one of my favorite characters, the doctor in this case, who he said, maybe you will win, but nobody wins for long. That's an important message to corporations. It's also important to new companies who get started and are growing. You have to constantly be looking at what's happening, because things will keep changing, and they change at an ever faster pace. And it's up to you to look for that. So with that, the future is already here. There's amazing technology all around us. There's nothing short of warp drive. Pretty much everything can be done with technology. It's just not very evenly distributed. So your opportunity as well is to say, how do I connect an interesting technology with a problem really well defined to solve it, create value, and create a new thing. So with that, I will say thank you. And I have my LinkedIn there for anybody who would like to connect with me. I'm more than happy to hear anybody who is been kind enough to watch this. And then also, I'm actually working on a book right now on this topic of orthodoxies. And so this link, which I will send out through the event organizers here separately, is if you want to pre-register for the book, I'll be giving out copies to anybody who came and saw this talk. So thank you. And thank you everybody for your time.
Thank you very much for that. I really enjoyed it. There was a lot of in there and a lot of things which just deeply resonated. And the funny thing is, I like the example with the shipping industry, where you say basically the solution is get an outsider in who does things differently and just questions the status quo. And you brought some great examples there. However, I have the feeling that there's a lot of industries that hate the idea of getting someone from the outside, because they do things differently, and doing things differently scares them, and it challenges their culture. What's your experience on that part, handling fear of the unknown and changing culture?
Well, and that's why I had this slide in there about CRISPR. So two things. One is I'm a huge fan of what Elon has done in disrupting industries. This is not a personal commentary on him. It's actually just his view. He took on 3 industries most people would say are not disruptible, right? He first went after banking with PayPal. He went after the aerospace industry, which is incredibly stayed with SpaceX. And then he took on cars with Tesla, right? Now, he didn't start these in many cases, but he invested them and then he built them. I mean, Tesla was already there. He actually invested it and then took over. But he sees that just because something is looks like it's impenetrable doesn't mean it's impenetrable. And that's, so he's the classic outsider. The issue in corporations, and this is something we'll be talking about later on the panel, is that, I actually did some research on innovation across corporations over a 25-year period. And what I found is if you actually look at the Fortune 500 list of corporations and you take out all the companies that are new to the world in the last 25 or so years, it's a little bit fuzzy, but like that includes the Googles and the Salesforces and all of those, take them out. And what you're left with is about 460 companies that have been around for a long time or some period of time. Of those 460 companies, if you say that innovation is defined as top and or bottom line growth of at least 30% through organic means, not through acquisition, not through just market expansion, whatever else, but like net new creating something, and you use that as a metric. Now that's, you can argue that what you will, but what's interesting is the number of companies that actually make it through that filter is 9 out of about 460 over a 25-year period, which then of course begs the question, what is going on? And that's what led me down the path of saying, why don't companies innovate? And it turns out there's a whole bunch of structural reasons, everything from, if you're public, good luck with that, because only companies that are public and have gone public and from the beginning said, we're not making a profit anytime soon, like Amazon did, like Salesforce and others, because we're investing in the company, could get away with it. But once you are a established public company, especially if a CFO takes over as a CEO, as happened in many places, what do? They cut costs because the investors are expecting return. I actually saw a great talk yesterday with Simon Sinek. He was on our internal company meeting. We were talking, and he's a fantastic speaker. And he was talking about this issue of, corporations where they are now making decisions, even if they're profitable, cutting employees because that's what the investors want. And that destroys the culture. But now you're getting the issue of where does culture really come from? The only companies that were successfully innovating were except for the ones that were still led by their founders or were net new, were ones where somebody came in from the outside and rebooted the company, which is really hard and really rare because board of directors, shareholders, et cetera, generally are afraid of that unless they're at a burning platform stage.
Now, I'm curious here because now I have two questions on this. Question 2 is the first one. Now, obviously, we're in the midst of a crisis and pandemic, and basically it's not a crisis. It's like thousands of crises all interconnected and intertwined. And a lot of companies' first reaction was to stop innovating and secure the core business, right? I don't know what the number is, but let's take a wild guess, 90% or something like that, probably. And a lot of them will be probably cutting costs now in order to get out of the crisis, which seems very intuitive, but essentially it's the worst thing to do, if I'm getting you right.
It is, and the data backs that up. Actually, we, a decade ago, and I think The Economist was doing work with Accenture back then, where we actually did research on this. That was published. It was essentially companies that innovated during the downturn, that invested in R&D. Some of the biggest product launches occurred during recessions. I mean, even the iPod came out in the middle of a recession, right? It was right after September 11th when the iPod was released, right? And then they launched the Apple Store, around that same time. So companies that look at that, it's kind of like the saying, when everybody else is panicking on Wall Street, that's the time to maybe look at buying. It's the same kind of thing. When everybody else is cutting their expenses, that's the time to invest because you're going to grab a disproportionate share of the market afterward.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm loving the approach of getting people from the outside in. Now, I work a lot with corporates in Europe, and I see a lot of, especially German corporates, and the idea of getting people from the outside is something which is very much pushed away because that's what you don't do. And then again, I don't mean it in an offensive way. A lot of people just love having engineers in an innovative field where I have a feeling, yes, that's okay to a certain degree, but they're very homogeneous in their thinking. It's kind of a lot of binary thinking, 1 and 0, 1 and 0. What's your approach on that?
So it's interesting. I think one of the challenges people fall in love with, which is why I use the example of Fresh Express in the salad, is that not everything has to be technology driven. There are times where technology can be a great differentiator for something you're launching, and it's oftentimes even looking at that device, the Amazon device that sits on your counter, which I won't mention because again, it's on my desk here. With the exception of the voice response, there's no new technology in it, right?
Yeah.
Or it's just taking a speaker, a microphone, a few other things, putting them together, and then making an interface to the world. The key is saying, do we know the right problem to solve? And engineers are oftentimes good at that if you can point them in the right direction. Well, one of the issues I have more fundamentally, and you use the word innovative, is the word innovation, because companies use it all the time now. CEOs use it all the time. It's like they want a box of it at, Carrefour or at Costco, and they have to use it in every sentence, right? In every slide, every deck. And the problem is we don't even agree on what it means, right? So some people use it as a noun, a verb, an adverb, an adjective, and we all think we're saying the same thing. So how is it at all possible that we're going to come up with the same outcome, our expectations are wildly different.
Yeah. No, it's always, as I believe I heard today again, of defining the actual thing you're tackling. And most people don't take them on. You said it, right? 55 minutes of defining the problem and 5 minutes actually solving it. That's the smartest move. And I've seen so many people talking about innovation, and then you say, well, radical, incremental. They go like, no, well, innovation. You go, yeah, we should talk. And last question. I mean, I could talk with you for hours. 2 questions. Number 2, when's the book coming out?
Hopefully later this year.
Yeah,
I have like 400 case studies that I'm just now organizing into those categories. Some of the ones you already saw in this presentation, but with a lot more depth. I very quickly flew through the examples here, and there's so many more behind it. But the world's full of fantastic stories like that.
That's great. I'll hit you up later on. I'd love to get my hands on a copy, and looking forward to reading that. I'm not being paid for this. I'm just pure curiosity. And the first question is, this is like totally out of the box, but something that's kept my mind occupied the last couple of days. Now, I truly believe that people love following a narrative. And if there's a popular person leading a strong narrative, they love following him or her, no matter how good or bad the deed actually is. If it's a strong narrative, they're all in. And I had the feeling the last couple of years, Elon was kind of like the master of all things good, and he was leading the narrative, and he could build a flamethrower, and people loved him for that, to fund. It's a flamethrower, and people are like, it's a flamethrower, it's fantastic. No, it's a flamethrower. And now I have the feeling, that's just my gut feeling, that he may have kind of crossed a line he shouldn't have crossed with the whole twiddling around with Bitcoin and Dogecoin.
Yeah.
What's your take?
So this is why I said, like, I think from a business point of view, he is I don't have any real questions about his his insights and his vision. And he doesn't have to be 100% right. I mean, it's like, Jeff Bezos said, when he's 70% confident in something, he moves with it. He can't wait till you're 100%, which means you're going to get things wrong. Sure. But he moves on from that, right? They both do. I think that the danger we have, and we see this too often, is that people confuse the person and what they're doing in the public sphere with who they are as people.
Yeah.
And they get this cult of personality. And we are a society that is driven by personality company. I really don't understand Instagram followers and promoters and all that kind of. I understand it exists. I understand people making money at it. I just don't personally get it.
Same.
So, but a big section of the world does, and they do that kind of stuff. What their mistake is that they invest themselves too much in the identity of the person rather than in the things they're doing. And then when that person deviates from what they believe, it creates a big break, or they get into cognitive dissonance mode. And we could spend hours talking about that. But the short answer is, you can love SpaceX as I do. You can love Tesla or PayPal or any of the other things that are being done by any of these companies without necessarily agreeing with what the leader has to say about other stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, out of curiosity, just pushing you, do you think he's gone that step too far? Do you think it's something the internet is going to forget in 2 weeks when he launches the next flamethrower?
Well, I mean, as far as like people's reaction to him saying Bitcoin is environmentally damaging.
Yeah. And then dumping the price and so on. And
well, yeah, but it's people who ran the price up because they believed that he magically is going. I mean, he bought $1.5 billion worth of the stuff. There's $1 trillion of value out there. It's like, they were investing for the wrong reasons. If you believe fundamentally in the premise of cryptocurrencies, and that only a few of them are going to become, because you can't have 1 million cryptocurrencies, it doesn't make sense, right? But if you have a couple that are out there, one can be a store of value, which is what the Bitcoins of the world are, and the other is a platform for all kinds of future decentralized trading and finance, et cetera, which is what Ethereum and others like that are. If you believe that they actually have a purpose and that they are going to replace in some respects what central banks are doing, which the central banks certainly believe because they're creating their own digital currencies. The Economist issue this week is all about that. Then invest in it. If you're investing in it because Elon said it's going to the moon, then go buy a lottery ticket, because you'll get a faster losing of your money.
Yeah.
Because it's just basically a tax for people who are bad at math.
Mm-hmm. I'm totally with you on that. I was just curious just to hear your opinion, because no, the funny thing is, like,
I'm a long-term buyer and holder of this stuff because I believe that it will eventually be worth quite a bit. Not Dogecoin, by the way, but the other ones.
I did that as well, but just a couple of years. But I'm enjoying the dip, because the dip is a great opportunity to buy.
Exactly.
It's not me saying you do that. I'm just saying
Yes, we do not provide financial advice here. All I'm saying is that if you believe that a platform for decentralized finance between individuals, again, read the book, The Role to the Public. This actually ties in with that narrative very well.
It's a pleasure talking to you, Shobali.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure, everybody.
Thank you very much. And now let's have a look at who the next speaker is. And as ever, let's roll. I'd probably say video, but that's like so old, that word. Let's roll the video. Can't think of a better word. Let's roll the video. And there's our next speaker. The talk is called Transforming Uncertainty into Opportunity. What a fitting title for challenging times. The Serendipity Mindset with Professor Dr. Christian Busch. How are you, Christian, today?
Very good. Thank you so much for having me, Daniel.
Good having you. Stage is yours. Enjoy yourself and have fun. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. And good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone, wherever you are in the world. It's wonderful to meet you, hopefully soon again in person. I have the pleasure to take you on a journey from transforming uncertainty into opportunity and really thinking about how can the science of serendipity help us to create innovation, to create impact, and to create smart luck in this fast-changing world. It's something in our research, in our work, that's come out as one of the key denominators of those people who really create successful startups, create successful social enterprises, create successful companies, that idea that they're able to see something in the unexpected and turn that into positive unexpected outcomes. They're able to cultivate serendipity. So what I'd love to do today is really, being the German I am, a very structured table of content, starting with a bit of context, then really diving into the art and science of serendipity, and then talking about some of the practices. How can we build a muscle for cultivating unexpected positive outcomes? So to give a bit of context, I used to be this rebellious kid in high school, probably held the unofficial world record of how many dustbins you can knock over on your way to school. I was kicked out of high school. I had to repeat a year. And, I transferred this lifestyle into my driving style. And one day I wasn't so lucky anymore. I smashed into 4 parked cars, all of them completely kaput, including my own. And I won't forget the policeman who came to the scene and who said, "Oh my God, he's still alive." So this idea that I was supposed to be dead stuck with me. And, it took me on this intense search for meaning. I asked myself all these weird questions, if I would have died, was it all worth it? Did I do anything meaningful? And at that point, I only had depressing answers. And so I started reading this wonderful book that I highly recommend, especially for times like these, which is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which is all about the question of how do we find meaning in even the toughest of circumstances. And when going and diving through those different questions, what I realized is that what I enjoy doing the most is connecting the dots, connecting people, connecting ideas, and somehow making sense out of it. And so I started out as a community builder, and then entrepreneur, social entrepreneur, and later researcher and academic. And what I found fascinating on this journey of working with exciting people, building exciting stuff is that the most successful, the most purpose-driven, the most inspiring people, they seem to have something in common, which is that they intuitively see something in the unexpected, connect the dots, and make interesting stuff happen. And so that's really the serendipity journey that I'll talk today about. What are some of the practices we can use? This is the book that is related to that, where we aggregated a lot of the stories from around the world, where we took all the research from physics, chemistry, social sciences in general, and really said, what do all these different sciences tell us about how we can actually aggregate and cultivate serendipity, but also what are the inspiring stories around there? And more importantly, what are the practices we can all use? And so how can we create a science-based framework for cultivating serendipity? Now, why is that important? Hubert Joly said it beautifully, the former chairman of Best Buy, that the way you deal with the unexpected essentially defines who you are, right? Real leadership usually shows in those situations of crisis. It's easy to be a leader when things are going well, but it's much tougher to do that when the unexpected happens. And that usually differentiates those that do really interesting things from those that don't. And so what's interesting in this fast changing world for all of us, being it entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, good people in a relationship, whatever we do in our lives, developing a muscle for the unexpected, developing a muscle for whatever comes next in a world where we can't know what will happen tomorrow, but we can build a muscle for whatever comes our way. So when talking about serendipity, what are we talking about? Here's a couple of examples. On the left, if you have erratic hand movements like I do, you might spill coffee quite often. And so imagine the situation in a coffee shop where you spill coffee over someone and you sense there might be some kind of connection with that person. You don't know what it is, you just sense there might be something there. Now you have two options, right? Option number one is you just say, I'm so sorry, here's a napkin. You walk outside and you think, what could have happened had I spoken with this person? And option number two is you start a conversation, that person turns out to become the love of your life, your co-founder, your investor. The point here is that your reaction to the unexpected predetermines a lot of the outcome over time. Another example here is TEDx Volcano. You probably might be aware of TEDx, which is this, a conference that's locally organized, that is or a baby of the TED conference, which is all about sharing big ideas. And, a couple of years ago, I got a call. I used to live in London. I received a call on a Saturday morning. And, there was a guy on the other line I didn't know. And he said, hey, good morning, Christian. We don't know each other yet. My name is Nathaniel. A mutual friend gave me your number. And I just came from the Skoll World Forum, which is the biggest forum in the world for social entrepreneurs in Oxford. And he said, look, I'm from San Francisco. I'm in London at the moment, and I'm stuck here. This volcano just broke out with this huge ash cloud. You might remember the volcano with this unpronounceable name, E and then 14 letters. And that volcano had just broken out. And that ash cloud blocked all planes to leave from London and to flights throughout Europe were impossible. And so Nathaniel said, hey, look, I'm stuck in London. And as are all these other people who were at the Skoll World Forum. So I want to organize a conference. Within 30 hours, Nathaniel organized a full-fledged TEDx Volcano conference with speakers like Jeff Skoll on the stage, with over 10,000 people on the recorded live stream, completely sold out, wonderful event. What he did was that everyone else faced the same problem, right? Everyone else had the ash cloud coming, but he said, you know what? All these amazing people being stuck in London, let me see what I can do with this. And he turned that into an event that put him on the map. Now, another example here, anyone has an idea what that might be on the upper right? Any ideas? So that is a couple of decades ago. A couple of researchers were, testing angina medication with people. They gave people medication, and they realized, oh my God, there's some movement happening in male participants' trousers. And, that seemed quite embarrassing, right? There's just something happening in some participants' trousers. So what would we usually do? We would probably say, oh, wow, that's unexpected. And we should probably either ignore it, or we should find a way to have this quote unquote side effect go away. They did the opposite. They said, you know what, that's unexpected, but there's probably a lot of men in the world who might have a problem in that department. So why don't we build a medication around this? And that's how unexpectedly Viagra evolved. Now, here on the lower left, you see a COVID example, how breweries, who unexpectedly had to lose most of their customers. When you're a brewery, you sold to restaurants and they closed down. And they said, you know what, but maybe we can use our alcohol to produce hand sanitizer. And that's how unexpectedly they became a hand sanitizer company. And then last but not least, here down, any ideas what that might be on the lower left? The lower right? Any ideas? So that is a potato washing machine. And so, a couple of years ago, a company I've been working with in China, they produce washing machines and refrigerators. And they received calls from farmers. And the farmers called them up and said, your crappy washing machine is always breaking down. So they asked, well, why is it breaking down? Well, we're trying to wash our potatoes in it, and it doesn't seem to work. So what would we usually do? If a customer responds to us like this, we would probably tell him and quote unquote educate them on our product, right? We would say, well, don't wash your potatoes in there. It's not made for potatoes. It's made for clothes. They did the opposite. They said, you know what, that's unexpected that they do that, but there's a lot of farmers in China who might have the same problem. So why don't we build in a dirt filter and make it a potato washing machine? And that's how the potato washing machine unexpectedly emerged as a key product. The point is, what all of these examples have in common, what up to 50% of innovations, inventions, most creative endeavors in the world have in common is that they essentially come out of this unexpected trigger, this unexpected moment, right? Spilling the coffee, bumping into it, like into someone at a conference, you know, farmers calling up and telling you they use your product differently than you thought they would. And then we have to do something with it. We have to connect the dots. We have to say, oh, there is something happening here. Let me make this accident meaningful. Or as we'll talk about later, we can also create more meaningful accidents. But it's really about seeing what is the meaning in this situation. Is there something we can do with this? And is there something we can connect the dots to, something meaningful or relevant? But also then a lot of times, do we have the tenacity to actually go through with it? You know, we sometimes, when we think about serendipity or when we think about those kind of coincidental creative insights, we think, yeah, it's like on Sunday morning in the shower, it just comes up. No, it was your brain working on this for a while. You were giving it a lot of information, and then over time, you had to have the tenacity to actually do something with it. And so the point is, a lot of times there's an incubation time, and you have to have the tenacity to actually go through with it. Not enough to just run into someone who could become the love of your life in a coffee shop. You need to go on a couple of dates, right? Same with an investor. You don't directly get the investment. You need to actually, you know, go on a couple of meetings, and only then that kind of serendipitous outcome can actually happen. So it takes that tenacity. We'll talk about, there's a lot of enablers and constraints we can develop within companies, and there's a lot of biases, of course, we all have. The problem, of course, is that we tend to miss serendipity all the time. We might miss the trigger, so we might not see something in the unexpected. We might not be able to connect the dots, so we might not be able to see what it could relate to, or we might not have the grit to actually do something with it and to follow through with it. And that's why most of the time, actually, we miss serendipity in that. I want to tell you about an experiment just to show you how much it is about the way we look at the world. So I would love to ask you, do you consider yourself to be a lucky person? If someone would ask you, hey, are you a lucky person? Would you say yes or no to that? And if you respond, you know, lucky, then this experiment might be absolutely in your favor. If you said unlucky, then we'll probably have to dive a bit deeper into some of these other questions as well. So essentially what they did was a researcher took two people, one person who self-identifies as very lucky, so someone who says, good things tend to happen to me, and someone who self-identifies as very unlucky, so someone who says, bad things tend to happen to me, I'm always in accidents, and those kind of things. And then they tell them, walk down the street, go into a coffee shop, sit down, order coffee, and that's it, then we'll have our interview. What they don't tell them is that there's hidden cameras along the street and inside the coffee shop. There's a £5 note in front of the coffee shop, and inside the coffee shop, the one chair that's empty is next to this extremely successful businessman who can make big dreams happen. Now, the lucky person walks down the street, sees the £5 note, picks it up, goes inside the coffee shop, orders the coffee, sits next to the businessman, has a conversation, they exchange business cards, potentially an opportunity coming out of it, we don't know that part. The unlucky person walks down the street, steps over the £5 note, so doesn't see it, goes inside the coffee shop, orders the coffee, sits next to the businessman, ignores the businessman, and that's that. Now, at the end of the day, they ask both people, hey, how was your day today? And so the lucky person says, well, it was amazing. I made new friends. I found money in the street and, you know, potential opportunity coming up. The unlucky person just says, well, nothing really happened. And we all have these people in our lives, right, who face exactly the same situation, but some of them just seem to be a little bit luckier than others. And we'll talk more about this in this context. One of the things that's, of course, always interesting is when we look at it, right? Something that looks like bad luck in the moment might actually become very good luck, or vice versa, right? I mean, if you imagine a breakup always feels like a really bad thing, but then maybe that is the way that actually allows you to meet the person you're really supposed to be with. I remember when I came with the first draft of the book, I came to the publisher and, you know, they were like, hey, look, we love this, like great business stories, everything else, but we need more love stories. And you know, I was then 35 years old, single. I was like, what do I know about love? Like, are you sure I'm the right person to talk about love? And they were like, yeah, see if you can find some love stories. So I went out and I had a coffee right after that, scheduled with a girlfriend of mine, an ex-girlfriend of mine. And you know, I asked her, do you know of any love stories? And you know, we're friends now. And she was like, well, our story. And I was like, what do you mean our story? And you know, she was like, look, we essentially dated, we, you know, supported each other, we serendipitously met in a Starbucks, we put each other on tracks, we introduced each other to the right people. And even if we weren't meant to be together, that actually was an important part of then us both finding the love of our life and a lot of other good things. And so what felt like bad luck in the moment or heavy in the moment actually turned out to be a pretty good thing in the long run. And so it always depends on when we look at it, if we interpret something as serendipitous or if we just see it as bad luck or good luck. Now, there's a lot of interesting things we'll talk about in a second, but one of the things, of course, to really be aware of is that there's a lot of structural constraints, a lot of inequality. Of course, we all have different starting positions. Me sitting here in New York, having access to education and networks, very different from a lot of my work is in sub-Saharan Africa. And when you start out somewhere in Kisumu, you certainly don't have the same starting point. So while we're working on mindset, of course, at the same time, we also have to work on all those structural constraints and things that actually makes it easier for people, if you have that mindset, especially to really move on and move up in the world. Now, what are some practices we can use to cultivate serendipity? One of my favorites is the hook strategy. And the hook strategy is about this idea that we can use every conversation, every interaction to cast a couple of hooks that then other people could connect the dots with. So to give you an example, there's a wonderful entrepreneur in London called Ollie Barrett. And if you would ask Ollie Barrett, hey, Ollie, what do? You know, this dreaded question that you get at every conference or every person you ever met in your life, you will probably ask you at some point, so what do you do? And, you know, instead of just saying, I'm a technology entrepreneur, he says something like, I'm a technology entrepreneur, recently started reading into the philosophy of science, but what I'm really excited about is playing the piano. So what he's doing here is he's giving you 3 potential hooks where you could be like, oh my God, such a coincidence. I recently started hosting piano matinees, you should come by. Oh my God, such a coincidence. My brother is teaching on the philosophy of science, you should give a guest lecture. The point here is we can think about what are the themes in our life that are important to us. We can write them down in a serendipity journal or just kind of remember them and then seed them into every conversation as a small, you know, here's a small hook, and then let the other person connect the dots. And it's surprising how often actually people pick up on it, especially when you have a group of people where it's quite likely that one of them will do. It's of course also a question of how we ask questions. Do we ask, you know, fixed questions like what do you do? Or do we ask questions such as, what did you find inspiring about XYZ? What is on your mind? Whatever it is, everything that opens up the dimensions of what the other person could potentially talk about so that we really understand what drives them rather than just, in a way, put them into a box. There's a couple of approaches here. Cara Thomas is a wonderful example of how we can cultivate things such as playfulness in our own lives to have more of those interesting conversations happening. She does 90-day experiments where she essentially takes a topic she's interested in, and then for 90 days, she's exploring that topic, has random conversations with people about it, and then sees where it goes. And so by doing this, she builds her portfolio of interesting things that she's doing in addition to her day-to-day job. Now, another thing is to look at mistakes and crises differently. We talked about Viagra as an example, but one of my favorites here for organizations is the project funeral. And the project funeral is all about saying, usually in companies or in families or in groups of any size, whenever something goes wrong, we have an incentive to hide it, right? Because we don't want to be the person who messed it up. We don't want to be the loser who's responsible for something. The problem, of course, is that we don't really learn from each other then, because, you know, it's one thing to talk about successes, but the real learning, of course, is in the failures. And so the project funeral is about saying, let's incentivize people to talk about, not about failure. It's not about celebrating failure. It's about celebrating what we learned from what didn't work, what we learned from experimentation. And so in this one example of a project funeral, you know, the idea is you present the project that didn't work in front of project managers from other divisions, and then you say what you learned from it. And in this one example, it was about this window screen. And the idea is that the window screen wouldn't reflect the light. So it's an amazing technology, but the team didn't realize, you know what, the market is just not big enough. So they laid it to rest and they said, next time we'll try to understand the market better. Now, someone in the audience goes like, hey, have you considered what this could mean for solar? If you take this technology into a solar context, how much energy that could absorb? And that is how, quote unquote, coincidentally, part of their solar division emerged. People might just say, oh, this was the right person at the right time. That was lucky. Yeah, but you know what? You created a process that made it more likely, even if you couldn't know the outcome, of course, by definition, but you can make it more likely that some kind of positive outcome can occur because you allowed people to connect the dots for each other. A third aspect is really around reframing situations. As I mentioned, a lot of my work is in very low-income contexts, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. And there's this amazing organization called Reconstructed Living Labs. And Reconstructed Living Labs, it's former drug addicts, people who had a very rough life, who come out of the local community. And essentially what they did was to say, what is something we can do here with extremely limited resources? And so they realized, well, one way to do that is to just develop low-cost education modules, such as 10 steps to use social media to build your business, things like that. And then they take this and go into other communities and essentially train the trainer and work with people on how can we help each other build businesses. And what they do, instead of going into a context and asking, what do you need? So instead of asking for a budget, they do the opposite. They say, what is already here and how can we make the best out of this? And so then when you look at an old garage, you see a potential training center. When you look at a former drug addict, or a former drug dealer, you see a potential teacher and you say, wow, you have amazing social capital probably. You're probably very creative and resourceful. So if we can turn you into a teacher, that legitimizes it across the community. We can transfer this approach, of course, in a lot of other settings, right? If you're a bank, for example, instead of saying, oh, we have to fire 10,000 people because we didn't make our numbers, we can say, okay, those people who used to be cashiers, maybe they could be a financial trainer, and maybe we can use the old office space as a financial training center. Whatever it is, in every context, we can think about how can we make the best out of what is already here instead of asking for resources. So when organizing an event or something, it's not about saying, I need 10 chairs for this event, but it's about saying, the restaurant next door, great, they might have 10 chairs, and it's also a nice way to actually connect with them. So how do we make the best out of what is at hand that allows us to connect the dots differently and to make the best out of whatever is there? This is Marlon Parker here, who's the founder of Reconstructed Living Labs, who now trained over 100,000 people across sub-Saharan Africa, and also gives people dignity and makes them feel, oh, wow, I can create my own luck because I can actually make something out of the local context rather than for waiting for resources to come in. For the sake of time, I'll limit the discussion of the other practices, but delighted to talk more, also delighted to connect with everyone who's in the room, being at Twitter or else. But this is a fourth tactic that can be very useful, which is really setting serendipity bombs. So this idea of saying, who are the people out there? Who are the 20 people I find extremely inspiring? How can I use something like LinkedIn or so as a second degree contact to send them an in-mail message and to just essentially say, hey, look, super inspired by what you're up to, wanted to XYZ explore, a completely non-pitchy thing, but essentially saying, how can I seed some potential dots out there? And 20 people, we reach out and send a speculative message about whatever the theme of interest is. We do that 20 times, and usually 2 or 3 come back and say, oh my God, such a coincidence. I was just working on something similar. We should grab a coffee. The point here is, it's not about pitching anything. It's about saying, how do I engage people in a conversation, especially those that feel that are very far away, because a lot of times actually they are more accessible than we think. And I think platforms like LinkedIn, via second degree messaging, where you can essentially contact all people that are friends of your friends, it's incredible how many people you can reach via that. Now, of course, in the virtual world, we sometimes feel that these water cooler moments were taken away from us, right? That you can just bump into someone at a conference or in the office. But we can recreate that online as well, right? We can do what companies like Google and others have been doing, where you do random coffee trials, where you say, okay, everyone gives us 1 time per week or so. then they get randomly matched with someone else and they go for a virtual 15-minute coffee to talk about whatever the theme of the company is at that point. And by this, you try to recreate some of these unexpected collisions. And the same, of course, we can do in space design and other areas as well. And then last but not least, and this is really one of the most important practices, we just finished a study with 45 of the world's leading CEOs, so CEOs of companies like MasterCard and other big companies, and we brought them together and we sat down and we said, what is it that makes you really successful? And one of the key things that differentiates them from others is that they're extremely good to say, this is my approximate sense of direction. This is my approximate purpose. This is where I want us to go. This is an approximate strategy. But I tell you already now that we will adjust this strategy depending on which new information will come in. We have an openness to the unexpected. And so instead of just committing to an exact strategy, they have the ability to say it's part of the plan that the unexpected happens, and that's not a weakness. That's not something that makes me a weak leader. Quite the opposite. That allows us to actually cultivate serendipity. And as Tom Lindeberger would say, who's running Cummins, he would, essentially look at cultivating serendipity as the most effective leadership approach during times of uncertainty, because it's the only way to actually navigate a fast-changing world. So a couple of final thoughts, ideas. Some of the broader psychological notions, of course, behind this is to say we have to normalize imperfection. Like we have to get away from this idea that we can plan everything out, that we can know everything. I come from Germany. We love planning. We love knowing everything. Not possible in this world, right? And if we assume that it is possible, then essentially it's not only a flaw in leadership, but also we don't allow other people to thrive because we make them afraid of the idea that they might fail. And the point here is that we should rather say, you know what? We try to avoid all avoidable things, but also we make it part of the plan that the unexpected will happen. We can, in weekly meetings, we can ask things like, what surprised you last week or something like this, which will bring up essentially the idea with people, hey, it's okay that sometimes unexpected things like a potato washing machine happen because people might actually want other things than we thought they would want to. A lot of importance, of course, of energetic elements, meditation. There's a lot in there in terms of really grounding ourselves and figuring out what we actually want to connect dots to. Of course, there's a lot of hidden social capital. And most important message really is that we don't have to have it all figured out, and that's okay. I want to close with my favorite quotes by Goethe. I grew up in Heidelberg in Germany, and Goethe wrote some of his poems there on the philosopher's way. And he had this beautiful idea that if you take someone as they are, you make them worse. But if you take them as who they could be, you make them capable of becoming what they can be. And that is really the whole idea of serendipity. Serendipity is about potentiality. Serendipity is about what could be and how can we connect the dots to something that isn't there yet, but we essentially do that by doing this. So we, in a way, then can make accidents meaningful, but also create more meaningful accidents. With this, thank you so much for joining. I'm looking forward to keeping in touch. And I think back over to you, Daniel.
Thank you very much for that talk, Christian. It was a pleasure listening to you. And very much looking forward to having a look at your book. What's your favorite Goethe quote besides that one? Should that have interest?
What I love about his philosophy in general is really that it's so much about the idea of how do we not take people as they are at this point in time? Because if you think about it, and that's actually what inspired Frankl, and Daniel, if I might take this segue towards Viktor Frankl, because
sure.
That goes full circle in the sense that Viktor Frankl actually was inspired by Goethe. Viktor Frankl, he was, during the Holocaust, he was in a concentration camp. And he always wondered, what is the meaning in this? Every day I could die here. So there's no hope. There's it's the worst situation you can imagine from a perspective of that there's anything you're looking forward to, right? And so what he did was to say, you know what? I want to have one meaning in the day to day. I want to talk with one person every day and make them feel better. And by doing this, I now have a meaning to wake up to. I now have a purpose. And so he would talk to a fellow prisoner every day. And so he did that. And then he also said, I want to write a book when I get out of here. So he had this duality of meaning, this duality of purpose. And I think that's a lot what Goethe has been talking about in terms of how do you understand that you need to sometimes see more than there is in order to really live a meaningful life.
And I have one more question, just maybe more on a personal note. I found it quite intriguing the way you said that you were probably not the most productive member of society as a young man, or younger than now. And then you had that kind of life-changing moment, and then you kind of looked about your meaning and then discovered Frankel for yourself. How did you come about him from being maybe a bit of a tricky character to suddenly discovering something like Frankel? Who brought you into contact with him?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I have to say serendipity. I mean, I got in touch with a couple of individuals, when I asked those questions, because the question I asked were very much related to death, right? They were related to, hey, look, if I would have died, like what would have happened? And I connected with people who faced cancer, for example, because in those periods, there's no intrinsic meaning in any of it. And then what they try to do is to say, how can I now reframe the situation? How can I do this differently? And I feel like that helped me a lot. And so that kind of coincidentally, in a way, led me to Frankel and others.
Absolutely intriguing story. Thank you very much for sharing that. I'd love to talk with you for another 20, 30 minutes, but we'll have another time. I'm looking forward to that. Christian Busch, real pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much, and take care and stay safe, and see you soon. Pleasure.
So
Thank you. Now, only one more thing to do is let's find out what's up next. And for that, we'll roll the next intro.
It is time to rethink and to realign, learn and get inspired. Prepare your questions and enjoy this insightful Podim DX panel.
That's right, and we have our next panel coming up. And the topic is building blocks of innovative and creative organizations. Sounds promising. I bet we'll have a lot of answers at the end of this. However, let's find out who our panelists are. And I like doing things differently because, normally you kind of read out their stories, what they've done, and they go like, yeah, but it's not 3 companies, it's 7 companies. And no, we didn't exit to this, but we exited. So, moderators always get everything wrong. And I would like you to get a bit of a feeling for them. And there we have them already. And I would say the easiest way is to say, Adam, how are you? And tell us who you are and what you do, that our audience gets a feel for you.
Well, it was 7 exits, not 3. So thanks for teaming me up on that. My name is Adam Burke. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Work Patterns. We actually help teams operate more effectively through guiding people management. We founded the company back in 2018. And then, of course, with everything that happened in 2020, we were kind of in the center of the bullseye for helping teams operate in complicated times. So prior to that, I co-founded and built a marketing technology company from 3 people to 700 employees. So saw a lot of different operational challenges and chapters through that, and that guided our thinking around work patterns. So nice to meet everyone. That's me.
Sweet. Told you they can always introduce themselves a lot better than I can. No pressure on the next speakers. Let's find out who Matej Golub is. Hey, Matej.
Hey, Daniel. Nice seeing you in Zoom. We've seen each other last, I believe it was 2017, 18 or so in Maribor.
18, yeah.
18, yeah. So my name is Matej Golub. I come from Corpo Hub, written here in the back. I'm actually sitting in the car. So how am I? I was struggling a little bit. I was the last one to enter in this talk because I was struggling with the electric charging of the rented car that I have. So that was my thing in the last 15 minutes. But now I'm okay. I'm here. I'm in the car. So similar to what Adam was saying. So we're also fiddling with teams in big organizations, trying to make them more agile, more innovative, more startup way like thinking, as normally they are not in the big organizations.
I'm already feeling something here. I'm feeling a vibe. That's sweet. Good. And Natalie Nixon of Figure 8 Thinking. Good to see you again.
Hi, good to see you. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm Natalie Nixon. I'm the president and founder of Figure 8 Thinking. I'm a creativity strategist, an author, and a global keynote speaker. And I advise executive leadership teams on shifting, on transformation, specifically by applying wonder, rigor, which is the basic key capabilities of creativity, and foresight. And happy to be here.
Thanks for being with us. And good to meet you, Daniel de Gruyter. Did I get that name right?
Roughly.
Oh, come on. On a scale from 1 to 10, how much did I score on this one?
I would say a 6.
A 6? Come on.
Can make it a light 7.
A light 7. Okay, give me a 10. How does a 10 sound like?
It's Daniel de Gruyter.
Okay, I'm with you.
You really got to put the G in there.
Okay. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah, thanks. Nice to meet you, Daniel. Nice to meet you, all the panel speakers, and Christian Busch. Really nice presentation earlier. Thank you for that. Also very inspiring. Very nice to hear. I'm Daniel. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm based in Malaysia. I founded and the CEO of a company called Incitement. As I said, based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. We build technology and mostly software together with our technology partner FusionX, the largest big data solution provider in Southeast Asia, to help large SMEs and corporates launch technology and software that they can use for sustainable engagement of their consumers with charitable organizations.
Great. Great. It's always good to hear you a lot introduce yourselves. It's always a lot more fun than just reading out wrong information where people, it's just wrong, it's wrong. I'm looking forward to this discussion. By the way, I'm Daniel. I'm your friendly host now for the next about 50 minutes, serial entrepreneur, keynote speaker, and lecturer, and many other things. Anyhow, now I'm curious. The topic is building blocks of innovative and creative organizations. I'm curious. I'm curious. What does that mean to your ears? What does that mean? It means we have to look at a company which is not innovative. Now we have to take the building blocks of something from the outside, create them to make them more innovative, or not. What does that title mean to you?
I can hop in.
Please do.
I also really loved Christian Busch's presentation that he just gave. It really resonates a lot with my work. What I find to be a through line between the way you just framed your question and what he talked about is curiosity. And I think about it less of building blocks, which I think is a bit more rigid. I also I'm not fond of like a blueprint model either. I really think about it in terms of capabilities, and the capabilities that I think are essential right now for any creators of organizations, of companies, of launches, really begins with curiosity, and thinking about creativity as toggling between wonder and rigor to solve problems, which is the crux of my book, The Creativity Leap. The capabilities to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems are what I call the 3 I's, or it's inquiry, so asking new, different, and better questions. And as leaders, that fundamentally means we cede control when we are inviting questions, when we ask more self-reflexive questions of ourselves, our process, our current state. It also requires a capability of improvisation. None of us get to work from a script, and the sooner we get comfortable with that, then we actually build truly more adaptive, agile organizations from the inside out. And the third, which I think Christian was speaking around, but I speak about really overtly, is intuition. And we don't talk about intuition in business school, law school, medical school, yet every incredibly successful leader I've ever worked with, interviewed, credits intuition coupled with strategic decision-making. And intuition is a type of pattern recognition. It's a muscle or sonar, and the more we use it, the stronger and clearer it gets. And the more we ignore it, the flabbier and dimmer it gets. So I really think about a shift to thinking about capabilities, and specifically those 3 capabilities: inquiry, improvisation, and intuition.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Who would like to add to this, to kind of understand the actual title and to start framing it the right way, that we're talking about the same thing?
I'll say something that might sound like a contradiction, but certainly isn't, to what Natalie said. I think that all makes a lot of sense. When she mentioned that there isn't a blueprint, that sort of got me thinking a little bit, and I would definitely agree that there isn't a prescription that you can give to every organization that's going to immediately work. That's going to have a very predictable, guaranteed output. That said, I think especially now, where things are a little bit more fluid, having predictable systems, and we talk a lot about intentionality. You just have to be a little bit more intentional about how things how decisions get made, how things get documented, what are our norms around idea generation. Without some of those systems and kind of some sort of rigidness, actually, some sort of guide lanes, you can end up with a lot of flailing. And so we talk a lot about like the structure that can unlock creativity, because nothing's more frustrating than people thinking, hey, I'm being creative here, I'm helping to generate ideas, and then have no agreed upon way for those ideas to find the teams that can help make them a reality, and bring them into the operating cadence of the business to actually bring them to life. So while there isn't one prescribed blueprint for every organization, I think it is important for organizations to have intentionality, to have agreed upon norms and systems to bring ideas to life.
Very interesting approach. Anyone want to add to it? I can see Daniel nodding quite happily, and the same with Matteo going, yeah.
Daniel, you go first.
Yeah, sure. I like what both Natalie and Adam mentioned. Two things in particular. One is the very explicit mention of intuition that Natalie brought up. I think it's very important to follow gut feel, and within an organization, typically, especially when you work with multiple teams, when there's multiple teams involved, I think what goes into people not fearing expressing their intuition and their gut feel is if a mindset is cultivated amongst the teams, that doesn't, you don't talk down on people, you don't shoot down ideas, you have an open mindset, you keep exploring, and it comes from a place of expansion rather than from a place of shutting ideas down. And intuition is something that in the whole new age cult, so to speak, is sort of written off as something woo-woo. I believe it's absolutely not. And I believe it's a very, very important force in creativity. Then going from something, considered a bit vague and out there, something a bit more elusive and difficult to define, what Adam mentioned, that there is, I think, a necessity to sort of systematize an approach to creativity. I think there are definitely ways and methods that allow people to sort of unearth ideas that they didn't know they had. Personally, one of my favorite methods, I think David Court Murray, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, in Borrowing Brilliance, he describes this very, very nicely in his book. I love this book. And it basically builds off of the idea that there is no such thing as an original idea. It's always a combination of two already existing ideas, either one or both applied into a different context. And I think that once you put processes in place that people can follow, it makes it easier for them to validate certain gut feelings that they have based on certain KPIs, metrics, factors, whatever you want to call it, that can really help drive a creative mindset in the company. And at the same time, I think brings, if people really follow their intuition and dare to express their gut feel, it brings people closer together, I think.
I'm liking that. There's probably a few people back home going like, what, wait, creativity has to be free. You have to do whatever crazy stuff you want to do. It's about having a colorful space with a lot of round bubbly balls and a lot of Post-its. I'm shocked. No, I'm not, but still I'm trying to be dramatic. Mate, what have you got to add to the sauce?
Yeah. Let me join the buzzword fest.
Go
here.
for it.
I mean, we're all tackling the same kind of area from different angles. I'm going to draw upon the last couple of engagement that we're doing, and those are with organizations who are more on the lacking side of the spectrum of innovation and creativity. So I'm talking staff from the central bank, staff from the National Health Insurance Institution, and some other public sector, or let's say old school industrial sector, which are coming on board. And the foundation, I wouldn't even call them the building blocks, the foundation of the stuff that we're talking here, I tend to put first. You will recognize it when you hear it, psychological safety. I mean, this is really, really lacking in many of those organizations. And then hand in hand, freedom and responsibility, which are the buzzwords from the culture of Netflix. So I just put those three things. If you'll take this a notch higher, then you're going to have a foundation, and then we can talk other things that we discussed. And this is, this is so lacking in so many organizations. They just don't say anything. They don't have any, any status quo, juggling, nothing. It's just like, we can't. So that would be the foundation from my side.
I'm liking that, because if we kind of take it a step backwards, and I kind of like diving into things head first and then taking a step back. I mean, needless to say, last year, 2020, kind of things changed a bit, quite dramatically. And a lot of companies who were like, let's innovate in 2035, were suddenly forced to change everything overnight, or others are basically being confronted with it. And let's assume we are a company. Let's select a nice company. Let's select a target company together, not by name, but by structure. What should we take? Let's say a very traditional setup. What should we go? Should we go for an SME or corporate? What would you like to go for?
Public sector.
Public sector. Okay. Public sector. How large?
Large.
What does that mean?
like let's say a ministry or something bigger, not just an agency.
So what is that? Like 1,000 people?
Let's say, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And now they've been told they have to shift overnight and become a lot more. Let's add one or two mission statements to it. What do we need to do? We're told you have to be a lot more creative and a lot more innovative. Yeah. Should we take that as mission statement? That's the part where you say yes, one of you. I'm loving the energy.
Let's go for it.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
This is the topic of the panel.
It is, right? So we'll take for innovative and creative. So it's the public sector, it's ministry, it's 1,000 people, and someone says from the outset, hey, it's 2021, 2020 was like really hard. We've got to change. We have to be innovative and we need to be creative. So first thing we're understanding is we need a set of rules for creativity. Is that my understanding? Step one? Okay, who defines that?
So can I build on this? I just want to say in terms of mission, I had a recent conversation with Warren Berger, who's the author of A More Beautiful Question. And he said something which I love, which was he posed a what if question. What if companies, instead of having mission statements, had mission questions, and really had questions that led them into the guidance of their values? Because as soon as we think with questions and realize that asking questions is a way of thinking, then we actually invite a much more democratic process. So when you ask, who should be responsible for defining these rules, these parameters, these what I call, we can have KPIs of creativity. I really think it would be ideal, not easy, but ideal if this was an emergent process, if we understood that leadership was emergent, that there obviously are the top-down, topically named leaders who are then remunerated in kind, but there are also leaders from the margins, leaders who are younger, leaders who are newer to the organization, but have storied experience from other sectors and other industries. So understanding emergent leadership from the bottom up and the sides in. And one other thing, I just wanted to clarify, I'm not sure that people actually heard how I was defining creativity. I mentioned that creativity is toggling between wonder and rigor to solve problems. So in my view, creativity is not doing whatever you feel like. Creativity is not pulling something randomly out of your armpit. It actually creativity loves constraints. So I loved and appreciated the remarks about how we need systems in place, but those systems are in place with the understanding that they are there to be rebounded against. Just as any great jazz musician worth her or his salt knows, you must know music theory, you must practice incessantly, you must know the chord progression of the composition. Why do you have the rules? So you can press up and against them, and that's where the magic happens. So any opportunity to make an organization design more improvisationally is the goal.
I think that's a key point that I think maybe a lot of people come into these discussions around how do we make our organization more what was our mission, innovative and creative, and then and come at it from a slide deck type approach that is top down. I think what Natalie said is right on. We think, and from my own experience building organizations, of course there is no right or wrong, and to actually make a change across a 1,000 person organization, you're going to have to come at it from both angles and both directions. And certainly leadership matters, and having a clear directive and rewarding and in a variety of ways, not just financially, but in terms of feedback and recognition. That those things are important top down, but to make these things really stick, like Natalie mentioned, I think narrowing down to the atomic unit of the organization, how are individual, the lowest level individual contributor, how is that person interacting with their manager? What are the norms that manager has with their direct reports that can surface ideas coming from those individual contributors? Because those are the people on the front lines. Those are people that are very likely to have the biggest ideas, yet the least amount of clout within the organization. So, focusing on, okay, what is that relationship like? What are the norms? Are those managers thinking in a command and control mindset where they're, thinking that their job is to move pawns around a chessboard, or is there, are they having maybe a more servant leader approach where they're trying to unlock and enable their team members and actually would view it as a great win if they lifted someone up and recognized them for having a great idea. So really, and then, just like with any problem, it becomes a lot easier to solve when you, get down to when you break it down to smaller pieces, focusing in on that, on the atomic building blocks of an operation and what those norms are can be a great place to start, but is often the opposite place that many people, especially in large organizations, do start.
I'm liking that. I'm curious out of that. So obviously we're saying, okay, this is the mission, but then we're kind of turning around, trying to understand, okay, well, what are the elements of it? And we are probably what kind of also here ringing along the lines is pretty much also the purpose. Like, why do we need to do this, and how do we convey that to the people actually performing the change? I'm seeing a huge nod there with Mate, who's going, yes.
Yeah, I was trying to throw Cynic's why in here because Natalie was going that way. First, like, yeah, why do we want to do it? And then once we get that clear, then we'll take it. But what's really interesting is this topic of structuring the innovation and creativity actually popped up just today. I had a workshop half a day in the morning with the Central Bank of Slovenia, and there was an older colleague, in the group. He was actually in the Zoom, I think it was Teams, I don't know, in team session wearing a tie. So that tells a lot. And then he was going, he was going in the same, sentence, we should jumpstart and motivate, but then again, also structure and optimize, innovation. How do we do that? I was like, oh, so that's interesting, the angle that you put out, Daniel, immediately the structuring of the creativity, innovation. Come on. Yeah, it's like, yeah. Oh. I mean, not in some organizations, you have too much of that. So interesting that we started with that.
Oh, I've had my fair time with large corporates on that topic. So I'm curious. Now, I kind of I'm seeing a big smile on Daniel's face right now. It seems like you have a couple of stories to add to the mix there.
Well, yeah, I was smiling because Mate was throwing out some buzzwords here and there, and that's, I like the idea of picking a public sector organization such like a ministry, which is probably the single most rigid institutional organization that you could possibly select.
That.
I was staying quiet, but I think it's a great pick because it's one of the biggest challenges I think in these kinds of organizations, and because of their sheer size, not only that, but also because they are and have to be extremely risk avoidant because they are dealing with lives and livelihood, and so they are the laggards. Usually because they have to know that certain things work. They can't go around like a corporate and test things the way if like a private sector company would do. But the thing is that we work with a couple of government partners. We worked with a few ministries. Ministry of Finance, we did some projects for. Youth of Sports, we did some projects for. Also, again, two very different ministries that we did some work for, and they have to balance sort of the actual impact that they create for their society and the popular vote, sad as it may be. So these buzzwords, meaningless as they may sound, are things that they like because they attract people, right? These are things that go viral or people like to shout out. on social media platforms. And so this is the kind of thing that ministries or public sector organizations, in our experience, tend to like. But I think because we are a private sector company as well, I think that through partnerships, I think something like a ministry can bounce ideas off of and leverage the capabilities that they don't have because of their inherent nature of having to be risk avoided versus a private sector company who's usually keen to take risks in certain areas at least, or can set up teams to do certain tasks for innovation. So I think by leveraging on partnerships and really leaning on partners from different sectors on either short-term or long-term engagement programs, they can get and attain that knowledge and internalize that knowledge, and then take that as a sort of bedrock to innovate upon slowly but surely. I think that would be my advice for her ministry.
Natalie, I think you're just inhaling.
Yeah, I'd love to just build on Daniel's point about leveraging partnerships. I think that's one part of the ingredients to this recipe, which is a very organic recipe. And it's interesting that we chose for this thought experiment a really large, bureaucratically burdened organization, because in my experience, size matters. Being able to be creative and innovative consistently and at scale, size really becomes a determinant, which is one of the reasons I believe that so many large corporations, in order to try to imbibe that secret sauce of creativity and innovation, they acquire smaller, scrappier startups, right? They either start incubators, accelerators in order to get a piece of that. Because after a certain point, the size begins to inhibit the stickiness and the serendipity that we heard about earlier, which is the place where really magical ideas are birthed. So the question to me becomes, how might we, even within these really large, ginormous organizations, redesign smaller pods and nodes within these networks so that we can kind of replicate what can happen when we can work at smaller size and scale. So size is a really important element here.
This might sound a little bit tactical probably, but in terms of like this idea of how can you motivate creativity top down, I think, expectation setting in a larger organization. I mean, the downside is that, on a large scale, it's going to be really hard for a 1,000-person ministry to bank a hard right turn into like a whole new direction. But the nice thing about it, and the way to maybe encourage to make sure that people aren't getting discouraged, is to emphasize that small changes can make large differences, because you are touching so many people. Whether you're talking about internal process changes or the actual output of the organization and its effect on society, where you're dealing with whole populations. So, rewarding, and again, this goes back to, what do you reward? What do you recognize? Rewarding, hey, it was a small idea, but you got it done. You pushed it across the finish line. You made it happen. You dealt with our bureaucracy. You found partners within the organization. You navigated the systems or the rigor and the rules that we have, and you got it done. And look how that ripples across an organization. You can start using these large numbers to actually multiply small changes by a large number of people and actually recognize how much is getting up. But more often than not, that's how progress happens, in small incremental changes, and not that some person in that ministry, invented, nuclear fission. It is going to be through a lot of these small improvements. And as a leader, those are the things. If you find ways to, okay, we have this pod structure, let's recognize the pod that created this idea and got it done. People will try to replicate that, and those small compounding improvements really do add up.
I'm curious. I want to dig in here right now because I'm loving what I'm hearing, and I'm also liking the idea of a ministry with 1,000 people. It's like as bad as it could get. You could have also said a small family-owned SME. It would have been easy. We could have said, okay, you do this, this, this. We're happy, and we'll have a coffee for the next 20 minutes. But okay, we're not doing that. So I'm understanding, kind of reading between the lines, that some of the next things I want to do is, first of all, whom am I talking to? Am I talking to the minister or someone like below or someone outside of the line? Just to get the record straight.
You don't reach the minister, Daniel. You don't.
I know, but I don't know. I don't know a thing. Tell me. So whom am I talking to within the ministry?
The first circle around the minister.
Okay, got it. Okay, and I'm understanding now the next thing we need to do is kind of, in a way, expectation management. We tell them, like, don't worry, we're not going to change the entire ministry. We're going to do it in small steps. Right? That's kind of the next thing. So we're doing expectation management, and we're also understanding that they don't have to transform entirely themselves, but it's perfect to find partners that can do that. And I'm understanding, so maybe from within, there's a lot of incremental steps that'll eventually ripple and bring certain changes forward, and that the more, let's call it the more radical change, can come from the outside. I believe that's what we call ambidextrous organizational design, if I have that kind of in mind. So is that kind of the next approach we're going to, saying, look, we can structure this two ways, stick to your core and find change from the outside?
If I can start, the way
Sure.
I calm the fears and anxiety is I show them first the meter funding from Reese, the startup way. When you have on the left, a lot of small balls, and then they're striked out. Okay, some of them will work, some of them won't. And as we go along, we build to more critical, more risky projects. And this sort of calms them down. And then as a next step is you have probably seen Tristan Kromer's simulation of the innovation accounting, when you have the balls dropping down and then the probability, and then you can stop them in halfway, and then you can stop your losses. That's also these two things tend to calm the more anxiety-ridden, feared folks. Like, oh no, we can't risk too much. We are too serious. It's like, yeah, there's a system, there's a structure where you actually stop the project before they come to big snowballs.
Now, I'm curious, like my ministry within the last year, basically what happened was on a Friday, they got a call, grab your laptops, go home. And on Monday, someone held an amazing speech and said, from now on, we're remote. You'll be back in 2 weeks. Don't worry. Now, my team hasn't been back in a year. And some of them have basically got Zoom calls where it just said, currently trying to connect. Others of them are not that productive. Some of them are doing really good. What are some of the struggles I could be facing of right now? And what are maybe some of the remedies to, let's say, 1 year in pandemic, distant working, whatnot, and changes that have happened? Because that's something I want to tackle in my ministry. That's why I need to change and make myself more innovative and more creative, because I'm seeing there's something happening.
Well, one thing that you've risked is trust. You have fundamentally forgotten that organizations are organisms. They are made up of humans. And as such, just like markets, they are not predictable, they are inconsistent, and they're imperfect. And so just kind of like even maybe if 2 days after that Zoom announcement, there had been a kind of a mea culpa conversation, and emphasis on conversation, not like announcement, but conversation, that would have been really significant. I know the president of a major wealth management company here in the United States. I'm based in Philly on the East Coast of the United States. And something that he started doing, and he's based in the Northeast part of the country. A lot of his market and his team are in the Southeastern part of the country. He went down to the state of Florida, got in a car, and personally drove, just took out a week, and drove and had one-on-one meetups with leaders of his team in coffee houses, backyards, wherever people were comfortable to have conversations. And I just, in the future of work, in this current fourth industrial revolution, the leaders and the organizations who will flourish and thrive will be the ones that understand, okay, got it, AI, robotics are going to take over tasks, but the ones that make more room for the human to show up will be the ones that flourish. So leaders who can step up to the plate and show that vulnerability, that mea culpa, that leading with inquiry, which has to also be self-reflexive, because it's not good to just say, okay, I welcome your questions. No, I mean, people are going to be kind of sitting back and saying, no, you go first. You ask a question, you fall on your face first, and then I'll follow. So it has to be modeled. But that human connection, any opportunity to have conversations, eyeball to eyeball, I don't know, pick up the phone sometimes instead of having a Zoom meeting. We have to redesign our relationship with time, redesign our relationship with each other, because the next normal will be some sort of hybrid version of high touch and digital.
That's so beautifully said, Natalie. Yeah, and you know, as a leader myself, I've fallen, you know, everything you're saying, I've fallen victim to, and feel like it's a lesson I have to relearn on a regular basis. You know, my background is in you know, statistics and econometrics, and I can have a tendency to look at my organization as a physics, you know, experiment, and you know, okay, do this, and then this will do this, and then that will do that. And, you know, especially in, you know, when we're in back-to-back Zooms, it's, you know, I fell victim to this even when we were in person, but just making my, you know, I'd have a string of meetings or string of usually like one-on-ones, and letting those one-on-ones be highly transactional. And just immediately, okay, we get into a room, I just came from the next one. All right, let's get down to business, and just actually taking that pause. And especially it's even easier to fall into that transactional conversation on Zoom, because it feels mechanical. You know, you're just your blocks of time lined up after one another. Taking that pause to just say, hey, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Like making sure. And you know, someone like me, like I need to have that reminder. You know, I incorporate that by like putting it onto my agenda, like, and having that, you know, thing. You know, but it's not that it's not genuine. It's just that I just need that reminder. And then I can have a very genuine conversation, but because Natalie is so right, like an organization is about the people, and it is about the relationships, and whether you're successful or not, that's what you're going to walk away with, is those relationships and those connections with those people. So you might as well invest in them. So that's the thing that's going to matter, both like for your organization's success and your personal well-being, and how you feel about the job you are doing and have done in your career.
I see thoughtful nodding on Daniel's face, like, yeah.
I don't really have much to add to this. I agree with this notion completely. I think that that teams in organizations tend to or could lack the human interaction, the bonding, the one-on-one time. And again, size matters in this context very much, of the team itself or the organization. It really depends on the type of leader, the type of manager that you have, and what kind of management style, what kind of leadership style they have. But you can see the craving of human beings around the world, with human contact, especially in places where lockdown is intense, by the success of companies like Clubhouse. Right, this is a social media application that focuses on oops, I noticed my internet connection is a bit unstable, but it's a social media application that is purely based on voice, and this is so timely launched, I think, because you know, people are in need of that interaction. Listening to someone in a room, right? The isolation can be very real, I think. We work with a lot of charities across Southeast Asia, and we see this all the time, right? It ranges from families trying to put food on the table to people who are by themselves, right? Or with the two of them, and they get tremendous anxiety and fall into depression. You see these kinds of cases soaring, and it's very, very sad to see. And I think that in an employment context, in a creativity context also, and in an essential building block for an organization, I think if the workplace can offer a form of comfort, a form of outlet, I think that will be incredibly helpful. So just to attest to what Adam, Mate, and Natalie said. Yeah.
So imagine I would have to report to the minister in 10 minutes, okay? And I have to report him on what I've learned so far. So I've kind of learned some of the things that we need to do. But I'm curious, what is it I should ask him or her? Let's make him a her. What should I ask her to do and to change within the actual ministry? So I'm understanding what we need to do is, okay, add more culture to it and purpose and set of rules for creativity. We need to acquire partners and leverage that. We also need to obviously have a strong expectation management, and of course also be obvious about some of the anxieties within our members. We need to reward and recognize. I've also understood that so far. I've also understood that it could be incremental changes from within, but from without rather large ones. And then there's the aspect of reconnecting on a human level and saying, okay, look, we have to meet people. We're humans. We need to add that level to it. And so she goes like, okay, I've understood. What do you need for that to work? What is the next step? I want this. What are we going to do next?
I think that if I may go first on this one.
Go for it.
Natalie mentioned before that there are mission questions, right? And I think that there's nothing that you would have to say per se, I think, but just asking someone, how are you? And listen. So that somebody feels like somebody's listening to them. I think that's a very important element. Of course, because if we start imposing our own views of how someone feels, it's typically a projection of our own internal state of mind. And so it's better to try to, get that information from someone by making them feel at ease and creating a safe space for them to share what's on their mind. I think that's important for the human connection to reignite that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. But what should I do in my ministry to get that sorted? I'm curious.
A bunch of reminders, right, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I think to agree, it goes back to the rigor Natalie talked about, or the systems that it's the same concept. Yeah, making sure that you're intentional about it, because if not, you're going to go back to, you're just going to do the same thing. You need that rigor, you need those systems, and you need that, and they can be small things. Again, like I like going back to the micro level, and work patterns as a product, we focus on the one-on-one between employees and managers. I think that's a great place to start. What are the norms around that? How should that go each week? Are the managers even showing up for those? Are they having them at all? I think you're right. I think to a degree it is reminders. It is which compounds into a system.
Go for it.
I love Daniel's reminder of you start with what's human. Love Adam and Matej's points about starting to really reverse engineer what are we talking about here and unpack the system. And I would like to add to the mix two very tactical things that might be done at this stage. One is to help paint this picture of this morbid future, right, of where we don't want to land. And part of that comes with that great exercise. I often call it a pre-mortem, but gosh, I just forgot his name. The speaker before us, Christian Bush, he calls it a project funeral, right? Like, so have a company funeral or a pre-mortem, right? And that way you are giving them permission to think about all the things that could go wrong. Another way of doing that, and this is the second tactic. I love this question. I got the tip for this question from Sunny Brown, and it is to ask, what could we do to make things worse? I love that question because it's not what could we do to make things better, but if we were going to make things absolutely a shit show worse, what might we do? And the reason I love that question is because as you lay out everything that we might do to make things worse from a people perspective, a financing perspective, an operations perspective, a sales perspective, all that, you actually have now drawn a playbook, not a scripted blueprint, but a playbook for what not to do, right? So you've given leadership and opportunity to really, oh, we wouldn't want to do that. We got to make sure we take care of X, Y, Z. And then you can begin to prioritize, right? You reverse engineer, okay, what should we try to tackle a week from now? What about a month from now? Within the next quarter, etc. So, goals are dreams with deadlines. I love systems. I absolutely believe in them. And I love dreaming and wonder, because without it, you become the company where ideas go to die and perish. And no one wants to work there. No one wants to partner with you if that's what you're about. So the pre-mortem and asking, what might we do to make things worse, is another place to start.
That would be actually quite a lovely recipe to go to the minister and say, look, minister, what I've found out is once this whole COVID thing is over, we'll have to change things. But to start changing them, we're going to have one lovely connection with all our employees. We'll do that one-on-one, and then we'll kind of add them together to find out what's the worst thing we can do? How can we really mess up this whole ministry? What's the thing you fear the most? And then we'll build one gigantic, pardon my French, F up. And then we'll go like, okay, and how do we avoid this gigantic cluster F? And then we'll reverse engineer, do the opposite, and we'll be the best ministry in the world. Is that right? we've just saved the world. I'm loving that. Being half Irish, I'm thinking this would be a tremendous party. Right? What's the worst thing? Let's open a drink and have a drink. What could be the worst thing? And then you just have this tremendous storytelling. Right? That would be horrible. I'm liking that idea. So to be creative, think of the worst thing possible, find out how not to do it, and then go change the world. That's easy, isn't it? But the last thing I have is what I'm always curious about. We only have like 2 minutes left. Is what I always notice that there's a lot of people who don't dare to speak out really crazy ideas because they're so worried that someone says, well, that's totally crazy. And I love reminding them of JFK and the moonshot and whatnot. What's your favorite recipe to help people be more at ease to openly speak about some of their dreams and absolutely batshit crazy stuff?
I was actually going to mention this as maybe one of the silver linings that we kind of stumbled into, but it is certainly backed by a lot of research, that brainstorming is often actually not best done in a group for maybe some of the reasons that you're highlighting. That the loudest voice kind of plants a seed, and then everybody starts to riff off of that. And so kind of having some of these remote brainstorms are actually a better way to tease out ideas from maybe the more introspective people in the group. So, just on a very tactical level, when we do have kind of idea generation conversations, instead of just like, let's all talk and throw ideas on the wall, let's have 15 minutes of silence. Let's each, write down 8 ideas. Now pick your best 2, and each person will share those, and then we can build off of that. So that's just a very tactical thing, but maybe a silver lining that we rediscovered that was already known, but something that we'll certainly keep in the future.
I'm loving that. And any last ideas to shoot into the mix? We have like 30 seconds.
Sure. Since Adam, Adam was talking was the first couple of steps of note and vote, which is popular in design sprint, and what's also popular in design sprints are the lightning demos. Hearing the really cool stuff that others are doing in a similar area. So this is usually what also fires up if you want that. Yeah. So other stories from similar backgrounds.
I'm liking that. Anything else to add in 3 seconds?
I would just say ask them.
Yeah, I'm liking that. Listen, it's been a pleasure with the 4 of you, because I decided let's do the panel a little bit more different, because that could be potential fun. I thought, with you smart people, this could be real fun. I enjoy myself a lot. Thanks for this, let's call it experiment, which was interesting. Thanks for making it a ministry with 1,000 people. That made stuff really fun. And hey, thanks very much for joining us. It's a real pleasure. And hope to see some of you in the near future soon, because in the normal world, there's the one thing we're not good at yet, and then actually connecting afterwards, having a nice drink, and then just having that very personal connection. Maybe it's going to work next year. I'm absolutely convinced it will. Thank you very much for joining us. All of you, take care, stay safe, and pleasure meeting you new and again. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.